Executive Director of the Asian American Writers Workshop. Thank you so much for joining us this weekend for today's special conversation between Nikesh Shukla and Mira Jacob. We're so thrilled to have you here, especially on a weekend. For those of you who are new to the Asian American Writers Workshop, we are a national literary nonprofit dedicated to uplifting Asian and Asian diasporic literature and storytelling. At a time when our communities are specifically vulnerable, we continue to offer a space in which we can all imagine a more just future. You can visit aaww.org to learn more about our programs. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at aaww, and also follow us on YouTube, where a recording of this event, along with all of our programs, are posted. During this event, we ask that all members practice nonviolence in the chat. Comments that are racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, and/or misogynist will be flagged, and the person will be removed from this event. We will have time for audience Q&A. If you're joining us on Zoom, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen to share any questions you have for Nikesh and Mira. If you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to add your questions to the live chat there, and our moderators will make sure that we get them over to the panelists. You can also find a link to purchase books by both Nikesh and Mira in the chat on Zoom and on YouTube. Please do support our authors. Their books are amazing, and we hope you'll support them by buying them. I'm going to briefly introduce both Nikesh and Mira, and then we'll turn it over to Nikesh for a quick reading. Nikesh Shukla is an author, screenwriter, and one of the most prominent UK voices on diversity and inclusion in the arts. He's the editor of the best-selling essay collection, The Good Immigrant, which won the Reader's Choice at the Books Are My Bags Awards and was shortlisted for Book of the Year at the British Book Awards. He's the author of a number of novels for both adults and young adults, including Coconut Unlimited, which was shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award and longlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize, Meat Space, Run Riot, The Boxer, and co-editor of The Good Immigrant USA. Mira Jacob is a novelist, memoirist, illustrator, and cultural critic. Her graphic memoir, Good Talk, A Memoir in Conversations, was shortlisted for the National Books Critics Circle Award, longlisted for the PEN Open Book Award, named a New York Times notable book, as well as a Best Book of the Year by Time, Esquire, Publishers Weekly, and Library Journal. It is currently in development as a television series. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Electric Literature, Tin House, Literary Hub, Guernica, Vogue, and The Telegraph. She's an assistant professor at the writing program at the New School and a founding faculty member at the MFA program at Randolph College. She's the co-founder of Pete's Reading Series in Brooklyn, where she spent 13 years bringing literary fiction, nonfiction, and poetry to Williamsburg. Welcome, Nikesh and Mira. Hi, Nikesh, over to you.
Oh, hey, how are we all doing? Thank you so much to American Writers Workshop and to Mira Jacob and to you for coming and watching this. This is the book, Baby. It came out a couple of days ago. Please buy the book. Put a book out in a pandemic. They said we'll be fine. All the bookshops are shut, but luckily we have amazing booksellers. Still finding ways to get books into people's hands. So it's a memoir. I guess I'll dig into where it comes from and what it's about with Mira in it. So I'm just going to start just to kind of give you the kind of stuff. The first chapter is called How to Bring You Into the World. Cool. I never considered becoming a parent until my mum died. I'd like to think there was a moment when the switch flicked on, or the force field came on, or the upgrade happened between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. plugged into a power source Wi-Fi switched on. It was nothing like that. Nothing dramatic happened. No tearful staring at bluebells, no Proustian cake-chewing revelation, and no need to cement my legacy. You didn't appear to me in a dream. I didn't. I didn't hold a friend's baby and have the final big chorus of Barry Manilow's "Looks Like We Made It" erupt in my head. I did hear that over the big voiced finale rattle through my ear hairs. You just arrived. One minute, your mother and I were getting drunk at Christmas, and the next, there you were, in my arms, asleep. Your clenched fists in your face, much like they did on the ultrasound. Your nose were long, your eyes were closed. You looked just like her, just like my mum. Maybe names have seeped up to Glenfield together to bring you into the family. Maybe you sort of just look like mum, in the way babies and old people are indistinguishably vole-like in certain lights. I tried to capture it on my camera. But you know how photographs capture moments and they're the narratives that prescribe them. So others capture fragments and only you can zero in on the history of that moment. Everyone else can just see the vole baby with her claws over her face. I look at it now and that photo of you looks like you and not like her. My mind was playing tricks on me in those early moments because when I first took in your face, all I could see was my mum. It was like she was alive then. The quick camera phone photo I took when I checked it hours later on the toilet, it was the only sanctum left. How wrong I was, I had no sanctum. In the maelstrom of your first day on earth, where I could justify looking at the phone. It looked nothing like what I thought I'd captured. It looked like you and not her. The photograph was of your face, a new entry, something I had not seen before, someone I had not yet had the pleasure of meeting, a stranger. And yet, went to the bedroom and saw you asleep on your back in your own mother's arms, the only light coming from the landing. I saw it again. I saw her in you. Were you her reborn? I shook the thought from my head. How could I project onto a baby the blankest of canvases my own grief? How unfair. And when you cried, I took you in my arms and went into another room. I stood and swayed from side to side. The curtains were open and out into the windows of the flat behind the house. The man with the beard was doing the washing up as he always seemed to do. In the room below him, two people I never moved in a controlled ceremonious circle. I don't know what an ayahuasca ceremony looks like, but I wondered if the bowl had some sort of hallucinogenic liquid in it. The guy who had his window open every single day all year round for unknown reasons that drove me crazy with speculation had his window open. I say none of this so you think I'm a creep who spends his time staring into people's homes. I say this so you know that in that moment, as I stared down at you, trying to take stock of the fact that my entire world, my entire life was on a new course, everything else around us was exactly as it should be. The world continued to the beat of grounded me. It stopped me freaking the fuck out. In India, the Ganges River is worshipped as representative of the goddess Ganga. Ashes are scattered in the Ganges. People wash themselves as a way of honoring Ganga, hoping to wash away sins, have a fresh start, change their fortune. Moksha, freedom from life and death. This is what Ganga can bring us. The Ganges descends from heaven to earth. She is also the vehicle of ascent from earth to heaven, a crossing point of all beings as well as dead. We scattered my mother's ashes in the Ganges, and here she was reborn in you, my Ganga, my liberation from life and death, my fortune, a renewal, bringing me a sense of rebirth and emancipation. I'd not been knocked off course by my mum's death, and now here you were, to bring me back, my Ganga. I held you tight. I sang to you, quietly, so your mother could sleep. I sang Brown Baby, a lullaby by Oscar Brown Jr., inspired by the birth of his son, Oscar III. I knew the song, Brown's first recorded one from a cover Nina Simone had performed live at the Village Gate in 1962. Your mum had heard it randomly one day on the radio, not long after we knew she was pregnant with you. She sent me a link to it, and I felt a weakness in my knees, knowing the sentiment applied to us as well. So I sang it on your first night, a way of hello, letting you know what sort of world awaited for you, who was in your corner, and how we were going to get through it. When all out of men's hearts all hate is hurled, Sweetie, you're going to live in a better world. Brown baby, brown baby, brown baby. I knew the song was about the civil rights struggle in America, but with all the injustice around us in this country, hate online, it felt important in that moment to tell you that you were a brown baby and I had your back. Listen, I told you, holding you up and whispering in your ears. You're a proud brown woman. My mum would have loved to have you, but she isn't here, and I'll do everything I can to ensure that I raise you as she would like to see. She came from a family of activists. Her brother made UK legal history. Her dad won awards for humanitarian work. She broke patriarchal taboos in our family in the 60s. And I don't want to be the sort of nonsense dad who tells you what you can and can't do and who you should and shouldn't be. I just want you to know, brown baby, that you can be whoever you want to be, unless you want to be a dickhead. Please don't be a dickhead. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Nikesh. I loved reading that
I
the
forgot.
first time, and I also loved where you landed. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I forgot this might be a family-friendly show, and there I am just throwing out curse words at lunchtime on,
No, I think it's
on
okay.
a Saturday.
I think it's okay. I think honestly, at this point, I think the kids have seen a lot of the adults in the whole COVID thing, so I feel like those boundaries are a little looser than they used to be. I know they are at my house. That's probably a terrible thing to say. Um, I actually wanted to ask you because there's a point, there's this. When I read that part of your book, it made me wonder because I've also written a book kind of to address what was going on with my kid specifically. And I know for me, there was a moment where I understood I had to write the book. And I'm wondering what that moment was for you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, thing to say is, not long after I agreed to do Brown Baby, I came across Good Talk and devoured it. Read your a couple of the essays that had been published online already, that kind of went into the book. They just sort of dictate the way I want to speak, but actually reading your book as I was doing that first draft was just a perfect thing for me, because there isn't like an oeuvre of work. There isn't like a canon of this kind of work in South Asian literature, certainly in the diaspora. And the fact that we have these two books that are kind of in conversation with each other, and like mine is, very, I guess, very inspired by the tradition of like that epistolary James Baldwin, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ali Wong, thing of writing things to the next generation. So actually reading Good Talk was just the perfect thing for me, because it really crystallized what I wanted to say and who it was for. But sorry, to answer your question, and I love Good Talk, by the way, but to answer your question, when I was first approached to write the memoir, it kind of started as a bunch of essays and columns that I'd written for the Observer magazine, and an editor had approached me after that column had finished and asked me if there was a larger piece of work in it, if I wanted to do a memoir. And I was like, I'm 38, dude. Like, who writes a memoir at 38? Like, my parenting journey is pretty boring. It's pretty run of the mill. Like, why? But my editor is very good, and she'd planted that seed. And it was not long after that I was thinking about, well, actually, my job as a writer is to kind of find the beauty in the ordinary, to find the small moments of grace in the mundane. And actually, as I was saying, like there doesn't exist this much stuff. I'm writing something that's quite new and exists. Kind of the book that I would have wanted to read when I knew I was going to be a parent, and like the podcast that is also come out alongside a podcast that I'd want to have listened to in those early months. And I'm an insomniac, and I was lying there at the ceiling night after night, thinking about all of these things that were just terrifying me about the world. And around that time, my friend Musa Okwonga, the amazing writer Musa Okwonga, he said to me, why are the oppressed always called upon to comment upon their oppression? Why not ask the oppressors to hold each other account? And I really loved it when he said that. And it really crystallized the thing for me, because I started thinking, I was ready to write about joy. I'd done The Good Immigrant, and I'd kind of strayed away from writing comedic fiction, which is where I started, and writing sitcoms, which is where I'd started. And I was like, I want to write about joy again. And I thought, how do I write a book to, about like a joyful memoir? How do I write about trying to raise my kids to be joyful, and but realistic when the world is so bleak and I feel so sad and angry about it. And then that sort of emerged out of that, the central thing that is at the heart of the book.
Fantastic. That's such a great question that he asked you, right? It's a really generous question in a way. It helps you kind of not define your boundaries by how the industry defines them, by how, probably all the crap editors that you've had until a certain point defined you. I love that. I love that question because it just gives you a little bit of space to breathe and imagine yourself. You write the book to a you, right? You write the book, yeah.
It also really, that question is also a really good way of just making me think, well, who am I writing for? As we saw last year when all the of anti-rape reading lists that came out, and obviously the 2 editions of The Good Immigrant that I put out were often on those lists, and it just really made me realize that I wasn't writing those. We didn't edit those for them to be on anti-racism reading lists. So I put them together to kind of help to center young people of color who felt marginalized and like to have a space where they had their stories told. And actually that's what I want to do going forward as a writer. And so that last week was a really great way of reminding myself of that.
Yeah. I mean, what a thought, right? Especially when I know when you were younger and when I was younger, the thought that we would talk to an audience that looked like us was like, no, why would you do that? I don't think you exist. You write the book to a you specifically, right? It's so much of it is directed right at your daughter. And I feel like I did certain parts of that in my book, and I found that sometimes it was really helpful, and sometimes I found it to be a stumbling block. And I was wondering if you went through the same thing.
Yeah, definitely, because if I'm addressing it to the you of my daughter or my daughters, it makes it much harder for me to get up on my soapbox. But also, it was a good way of reminding myself what I wanted to put in and what I didn't want to put in. Like this is the thing with memoir. There's often things that get sieved out as you kind of run your life through it. And the other thing that I kind of thought about was, well, there's kind of an interesting thing happening, because like I've been asked a bunch of times, like, when would you want your daughters to read this book? And my answer, actually now published, has been, they shouldn't need to ever read this book. If I raise them properly, they know all of this stuff. But then the thing that I'm finding at the moment that is in the book is very much, and I don't know if you found this, and I'd be really interested to hear if you found this as well. When you're directly addressing your kid, you have to talk of stuff on their level. You have to go to them more than bring them to you. I have to strip my cynicism and my world weariness and my jadedness out of the comment. To give you an example of that's not actually in the book, it's something that actually happened in real life a couple of months ago. And by the way, I know my internet is lagging a little bit. My kids are watching Disney Plus. I don't know why Disney Plus takes more bandwidth than other streaming sites, but that's by the by. My kids, so we live in Bristol, about 20 minutes walk away from where the Colston statue was removed during the amazing Black Lives Matter protests last summer. And my daughter goes to a school that has an association with Colston. And so when she went back to, they were having a conversation about Colston and about how to address that association. And they involved all of the students. And so my daughter came home one day and she asked me a question about the Bristol Bus Boycotts, which was a big piece of civil rights action in the UK in the 60s, where a black person tried to get a job working on the buses and was refused, and so black people in the city boycotted the buses, and the buses lost loads of money, and they eventually changed it. And so, while explaining this to my daughter, because she'd heard about it at school, I realized I had to explain to her what racism was, and she's 6. And so I kind of told her, well, racism is this thing that, it's where one person might hate another person because of the color of their skin. And her reaction was like, that's stupid. That to me. She's brown, she goes to a very diverse school. Like, this is not her world. And she's like, but this is stupid. I cannot comprehend this. And I was like, how do I explain this to her? So I was a bit like, oh, well, it might just be that, you have a person who might feel, and I stopped myself and I was like, hold on a minute. You're now trying to justify to her why someone might be racist in order to explain to her what racism is.
Hey, yeah.
That is intellectual dishonest with her. You have to see the world as she sees it, and you have to be reminded that, yes, at its core, racism is ridiculous and stupid and preposterous and has no place in this world. And so I'm constantly like having to relearn how to have these conversations. And I think that's so much about what the book is about, because even having that conversation for so many people, just like, I think it makes people feel uncomfortable. And like, one of my theories in the book, and like just is like, I think we could all do with feeling more uncomfortable. Like, being uncomfortable, yeah, it's like, it's awful at the time, but actually, like, we're not going to radically alter our view of the world unless we're forced to sit in our discomfort and question the way we constitute things.
Absolutely. Also, I just want to say, I wish that I had the thing that your daughter has. Like, I love the simplicity of like, that's stupid, right? Like, just the idea of it having no purchase in her whatsoever, of it just being like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm so not interested in that, and not taking up a lot of psychic room. Sorry, there's a, we're in Brooklyn. But the idea that it just doesn't take any place for her. It didn't take her whole soul. She didn't have to like go to the bathroom at work and tell herself all the things of why she's there. And it's not, you know what I mean? She's like, that's stupid. I feel like I've done so much work to get back to that stupid place. I just love that that's where she's starting from. Your mom.
But that is, sorry, no,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say,
oh no,
that's the place that I think.
You want me to do it? I'm so sorry. Okay. So I was going to ask about your mom, which is because I think your mom is, she's such a strong presence in here. She's a specter, but she's also, because of the way that she moves in and out of the story, so much of it is kind of guided by her. And when I was reading it, I wondered about two things. I wondered, one, about her influence on you as a writer, and then also specifically on this book, if you found yourself really called to her in a specific way.
I think her influence on me as a writer is in as much as she turned me into a reader. The one thing that she and me and my sister did without fail every 2 weeks was go to the library. Now, it's because she really loved those Mills and Boon's romance novels, and she would need her new stack of Mills and Boon's romance novels. But I had the free reign of the library. That was incredible for me. I did not have much free reign anywhere except in the library, and I could read whatever I wanted. And I was reading the Buddha way before I probably should have done. And like, I tried Punishment once, and and that being a reader turned me into being a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of her presence in the book, that's a little bit tricky, because when I was set out to write a book about parenting, I didn't think that it would be so much about grief as it is. But so my mum died in 2010 very suddenly, in October the 18th. October the 28th, my first novel came out that same year. And I was in such shock about my mum dying that I just took the decision to distract and throw myself into promoting this book, because like it seemed like a nice distraction from the grief. And what I didn't really count for at the time is that you just push the grief down and down and down, and you don't really deal with it, you don't really address it. And when I had my first kid, when she arrived, suddenly my mum's absence was very, very clear, because my mum would have loved to have met her granddaughter, and my mum would have been. And she, so like now I felt like I was grieving for her properly. To write this memoir, I it she was just so close to the page. She was, and I in writing the memoir, I realized I had to basically, I had to mourn her anew. Like I had to deal with that grief, and so um, while I was writing the book, I was doing a lot of stuff, like I was cooking, I was doing a lot of like meditation and like free writing, journaling about my mum, and I kind of to resurrect her in order for her, in a weird way, for me to grieve for her. And so actually through the process of writing the book, I kind of came to a new understanding of what that grief was, and where I needed to be. So it's a funny thing, grief, because it's never linear, and you also don't necessarily grieve at the time that you're meant to grieve. It's like, that in Hindu culture, you're supposed to grieve for like the 12 days after someone dies, and then you kind of, there's supposed to be like a lifting, a catharsis, and actually you
Doesn't happen right on schedule. Yeah.
No, I mean, and I think that's what I really loved about the stuff that is in there about you, and that kind of heritage and lineage that you're drawing a line between, and I was really inspired by the way you kind of deal with these issues in your own work as well.
I feel like when my dad did not die suddenly, he died long and painfully. And when that was happening, I remember wishing I had a book that could be like kind of ruthlessly funny about death, because it was awful. Like it was searing. Every day was searing, and I don't know how I kept my skin on. I don't know how I kept my brain together, but also it was incredibly funny because my family's just fucking funny. And I didn't find that place. Like I didn't find the place that could go as hard into funny as it could into tragic. And that's just the planet I live on. And everyone says you write the book that you need, but I felt like that's how my dad haunted my book. He made it like, I would just be like laughing and crying a lot at the same time. Because that's like where he lives emotionally in me. The biggest laughs that I've ever had were with him, and the most pain I felt so far in this life. God, I feel like I should knock on all the wood in this room that I said that, but that's also been with him. And it is really interesting to me how our parents show up in our work. Like my dad didn't want me to be a writer, or he was just kind of horrified the entire time that I was becoming a writer. He was sort of like, that's a hobby, that's a hobby. And there's so many other things you can do. And yet I find so much of my writing now sort of turns, even when he's not part of it, he's part of it. Did your parents have pushback for your writing career?
Yeah, well, I mean, my mum wasn't really around to kind of see the fruition of it. I mean, she was always worried. I mean, like my dad doesn't really notice unless other people in our family notice, and it kind of gives him a little ego boost. But my dad doesn't really. I mean, he knows that like I'm doing some significant things, but he's not particularly into it. It's just
He's not my son, the doctoring it. He's not walking around the world with my son, the doctor.
No, I
What?
mean, yeah, well, like got, when I got an honorary doctorate, that was when he became very proud. And also when I was like, Dad, can you, like my self-assessment, my tax is now beyond me being able to understand it because I'm like doing it through a company and stuff. Please, can you? So my dad, being my accountant, has been like a source of pride that I'm entrusting him to like sort out money stuff for me.
Yeah, of course. Um, what was the hardest part of writing this book for you? Was it the going through the grief with your mother, or was it some other part of the crafting of it?
Um, yeah, was there were a lot of things that the writing about my mum was obviously because of the kind of the very in-depth process I went to put her on the page. Um, the the stuff about climate catastrophe was also,
Yeah.
I'd write up because that is just something beyond my ability to comprehend how we approach it, And there was another thing that I wrote about that I decided to take out. The one thing that was personally hard, and actually the thing that I'm slowly getting used to talking about rather, was sort of developing a really after touring The Good Immigrant. So like I basically the Good Immigrant came out in 2016. So 2016, 2017, 2018, I was touring this book, going around the country, going around the world, talking about racism. And like being a shy, quiet, like fiction writer, comedy fiction writer, who's suddenly like being asked questions about this issue and sort of being spoken about, like, and realizing that a lot of the people who were contributors to the book, who were experts on the stuff with me, was for me to kind of be present in the, like people wanted the editor of the book, and so they would do an event if the editor came, and so I'd be like, okay, cool, but can we bring these people who are much smarter than me with me? And I would go and do these events, but because I was away from my kids a lot, my rule was if I was missing their bedtime for breakfast, I'd have to see them at breakfast as much as I could. So it just meant I'd go do an event and then I would just sit on trains for like 2 to 3 hours on my way home, arriving back in Bristol where I live at like 2, 3, 4 in the morning times, like sometimes like 5, 6 in the morning, just so I could be there for them at breakfast. And the stress of doing that, of like doing that where people are sharing their own stories of racism with you, and like that burdening, like, or just like sitting on your shoulders, you having to talk about your own, like your own instances of racism, in front of crowds. And then there was always like people in the crowd who like go, well, actually I deny that this even is racism, how dare you talk. Then they'd shout at you, and then they'd shout at you in the signing queue, and then like your Twitter is like a mixture. It's Michaela Cole films it perfectly in episode 9 of I May Destroy You, what it's like to be trolled. Like, you've got such noise, such extremes, people going, you are the savior of everything, and people going, you are the devil, and like you're just in the middle going, I cannot cope with any of this stuff. And I couldn't cope with it, and I wanted to reach for home, and home was sitting with my mum watching Frasier and eating snacks with like a bedraggled shawl over us, and I couldn't do that. And I was just sitting on trains by myself, shouldering all this stuff, and so I just would eat and eat, and eat more, and eat more, and eat more, and it became really unhealthy. I mean, it still is a battle with, and I put it in the book because I wanted people to kind of know the cost of doing this kind of work, and it's not work I asked to do, and I know it's important, and I know that by the very nature of me doing it, I can help bring other people through. But my God, it takes a mental toll on you. And I wanted to be honest about that.
Oh my God. I'm so glad that you were honest about that. It's so interesting. I found that same kind of horror in both presenting a work, in trying to reach people and knowing who my target audience was, which was brown and Black people who were feeling these things, and then also going out into a world that was largely made of people that either were kind of using me as a learning experience, like, you are going to educate me, so now I want to talk to you about this and educate me, educate me, educate me, which is a really crazy thing. After a while, you just start feeling like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Like, this is not the work I want to do in the world. But the other part of it, I feel like for all of the ways that we talk about the toll that the public social media takes, we don't really talk about the toll. Like, I know I was fully burnt out last year, and in a ways where I was like, enough. And the thing that I noticed most is that it was interrupting my work. Like, I couldn't write my work without the voices that doubt me most popping into the room with me. And like you were saying, your way was kind of eating. I felt like my way through it was just, I think I entered a space where all I could hear were those voices for a while, and then I had to really peel back from it, and that was sort of my way to get healthy again. But what do you do now? Like, what do you do? You've got this book coming out. It's the same. You know what you're up for. You know a little bit of what's facing you. What do you tell yourself now in this moment?
Well, first of all, kind of have to acknowledge that it's very different now. It's now in my home space. Like, don't tell any of the people watching, I'm wearing Avengers pajama bottoms as well. So I'm in my home space. So like how I feel like I can set more boundaries here. Whereas like when you're out in the world and you want to give them to people, you don't want to give people short shrift. And the thing is, like, when I've done I did a lot of school events as well. And I remember doing a school event and then rushing from this school event with a deprived area, then go and do a talk at the Treasury. And I just kind of got there and I made some like silly jokes about who the treasurer, like the chancellor in the UK was at the time. And people were cussing me online about like what a terrible job I'd done. Like, they'd come to see me do this talk, and I was like, I'm just a person, and like I gave myself at this school. I put my soul out there to like engage these kids. I'm really sorry I came to this thing and I was just like a bit silly. And I get that, but then if they've come to see you, you kind of have to put on the show. And so I feel really conflicted about how you deal with stuff like that. I know that there's going to be stuff in this book that people are going to want to ask me about, and it's going to be hard. And I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to deal with like people talking to me about their own grief, or people talking to me about their own like food issues, or people talking to me about their after like realizing my kids, or like whatever. So I'm still figuring it out, but it's good that in those sort of early stages, while I am figuring out, I am in my little corner of our little garret, and my kids are in the next room. And after this, I'm going to go and give them a massive cuddle, and we're going to finish watching whatever they're watching on Disney Plus that keeps making out this internet lag.
Pajamas help. Actually, someone had a good question in here. I'm going to start. I just want to make sure we get to the questions that people are asking us. Somebody asked, Carmen asked, do you both have any advice for writing a book with family distractions, remote working, cooking, demanding kids? And then the other part of that question is, did you both enter lots of writing competitions? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, we've kind of had to establish a very, very strict route to kind of do the day. The weekends are a bit wilder, but what I found when I was writing was I kind of had to, because like as writers, our job is to kind of be out in the world and then come into our little writing dens and like try and reflect that world back out. And obviously in the last, I've gone from being someone who has like works in the co-working space and I teach in London and I get to be out and about and meet people all the time, to like this is where I do my work and my meeting time, and I exercise. And, my world has become very small in comparison. So I've had to do a lot of different things um, to kind of help me get through the writing. What I found, I don't know, this is a very practical thing. I don't know if it's helpful for people, but because I'm writing a novel that's set at a very specific time, at a very specific time of year, in a very specific year, I've made a playlist of songs to kind of conjure the spirit of like this very long hot summer that I'm writing about in 2018. And I walk around listening to this playlist and making notes on my phone about what I want the novel to be. And I'm just finding that just really leaning into the thinking time and the immersive stuff that you need to do when you're working on it. And the more of that I do, the more I find that when I actually sit down to write, it's actually like I'm ready to put stuff down on the paper. I guess I'm just a novelist who like obsesses about the world before I sit down to try and put it on the page.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to answer that question too. I think my answer is Carmen, because I feel like my writing life has never looked like, I mean, first of all, it's never looked like the Sex and the City writing life where somebody just has an endless amount of time and someone just throwing money their way. I talk about this a lot, but I wrote my first book from 11 o'clock at night till 1 a.m. over 10 years. It just took a while. It took a while because of the book that I was writing, and it took a while because I didn't know how to write a book, and it took a while because I was working constantly and I also had a child. And so all of those things happened, but I just wanted to say out loud and to you that the thing that I had to understand early on was that my writing life wasn't going to look like anyone else's writing life. And sometimes it was going to look like me picking up my phone while I was shoving things in a dryer and just jotting down 3 ideas very quickly. And then those ideas would meet out over a week. And it wasn't glamorous, but it actually got the job done. And the thing that I know now, having lived through those 10 years, is that if I wouldn't have shown up for that, for like the weird way of like getting it done, I wouldn't have gotten the book done. So one of the things I had to do was learn to kind of take it easy on myself psychologically and be like, you're a writer, you're a writer. It doesn't look like it, sometimes doesn't look like it. Sometimes you've gone 2 weeks without writing a single word and the story's just turning in your head. Maybe no one else in the world's going to call you a writer, but you're a writer. And that just kind of getting myself to that place, I think freed me up a lot. So that's, if you're going through that,
It's
and we do.
so the writing process of others as well. Whenever I do talks, I'm always being asked about process, and actually I always try and put the question back onto people and ask people, have you ever experienced a time where you got the best of yourself? Like, how do you work? How do you work effectively? Lean into that, because like the way I work is very different from the way you work, because like not only do we have different ways of like attacking a problem, we also have very different lockdown where I'm balancing homeschooling my kid, limited devices in the house to be able to homeschool, thinks that you want to do a Zoom and you're like, honestly, it can be an email, that's fine, and all the rest of it. And so I know that I am not interested in writing 1,000 words a day or 1,500 words a day or whatever. That's, to me, it's not a sign of achievement. A sign of a good day is that I spent an hour of really good. It may be 250 brilliant words. It may be like 750 words of slop. It might be, moving forward but I put time in. I showed up. Like, showing up is more important words, I think, especially at a time where everything feels so precarious and uncertain. Like, the last thing you can do is, just pad your manuscript out with stuff that you're going to edit out in a couple of months' time.
That actually leads to, somebody asked in the chat, how long did it take you to write Brown Baby, and what do you want the reader to take from your book?
Oh yeah, 2 questions. I wrote it like 4 months.
Wow.
And you know what? It's like structurally not far what that first draft was. I don't know why. Like, I don't know why I was set like an insane deadline for it, but it just kind of went the way it needed to, and I turned it in. I think I was very sort of smart. I was smarter with this one because I was like, I know there's going to be time when my agent and my details start this, and so I did a lot of planning and a lot of research before I actually started it. But then it just came out really. It wasn't an easy write, but it came out, and then it's supposed to come out in September last year, but then it got pushed because of COVID. But it was done like last February. It was like ready to go last February, which is why, like, since last February, a bunch of references in it, like whether it's Trump or Fair and Lovely no longer being called Fair and Lovely, or other things are now out of date, but like it's still spiritually and emotionally the truth as it exists in my life. And the other question, what do I want readers to take from it? Like the essential question, as I said at this being a book about how to raise your kids to be joyful in sad time, like bleak times when you feel so angry about the world. I think for me, like, so many parents should be thinking about some of the stuff that's in the book. White parents should be thinking about all the stuff that I write about race and racism. Like, dad should definitely be thinking in terms of like ensuring we're not perpetuating the patriarchy and all those kinds of things. So it's open up conversations about the realities of all of this stuff that kind of is making nervous, because it is an optimistic book, and I don't necessarily think it's just for parents, but it's certainly a book that's about a potential route for people like they want the world to be a better place and don't necessarily know where to start.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, and there was one more question that I thought was kind of fabulous from Justin. Is asking, since Nikesh is done writing for the screen and a Good Talk is being made into a TV show, wondering if either or both of the authors could talk about navigating that space as a prose writer. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? You've done such a breadth of work.
I'm very excited about the Good Talk TV show. I'll say more about that, but I writing for screen is so different from writing prose. It's so much more technical, and depending on what screenwriting things you read, you should make your screenplays really authored or very, very unauthored. But what I've come to grow confident about in recent years, as kind of like more and more screen stuff, is actually the thing that people want to work with is our voices as writers, and so that voice should be on the page. That view of the world should be on the page, whether it's in the voices of the characters or the things they do, or in the way we might even attack stage directions. And that's so important. And if you want to read really brilliant authored scripts. Like read Greta Gerwig's script for Lady Bird and for Little Women. They're both so well written, and they're also um, they also just show that screenwriters don't need to be super sort of technical and distant from the page. I think like so many screenwriting books tell you to almost distance yourself from the page, and I don't like that.
Hmm.
How about you?
Um, so one of the things that I am really enjoying, so I love learning. I think I'm at my best in writing when I'm learning something new. So with the last book, I was learning how to draw a story. And right now I'm in the process of learning really, I mean, these are just sort of technical things, but like how much information a viewer can take jumping from one scene to another, or like how to craft I love dialogue, but how to craft dialogue so that it ends slightly earlier than it does for me in, you know, in a kind of in a fiction book. It's a very different thing. You really bring it to a close in a certain way, and then with Good Talk that got a little bit clipped, and now I'm learning the timing of that, which I know isn't you know, this isn't a industry question. I'm not answering the industry question because I am still baffled by the industry, to be honest. Like because the industry here in the US is centered in Hollywood, I don't understand Hollywood people. I'll just say that. Like, I don't know when I'm doing something right and when I'm doing something wrong, because you know, it's just like, great, great, great. I never understand whether or not I'm really a New Yorker will be like, ah, no, you missed. That was not good. And I appreciate someone that'll sort of slap me and tell me that. So I can't tell you about navigating the industry or whether or not I'm doing that part of it right. But the craft part, the part where you are back in the process of figuring out how to tell character in a way that feels fresh, or the part where you are figuring out what conversation you want to further on the screen in a way that you can't possibly further it in your life, like all of that has been super interesting and vital to me, and also it's been part of my learning process. So we have one more question, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. But from Grace Prasad, she asks, "Thank you for this enlightening talk. How did you both navigate writing honestly and critically about family members?" And I think that's a good one to go out on. So, what do you think, Nikesh?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was that critical of yeah, definitely some work, and you know, part of what I was trying to work out in the book was my relationship with my dad. But my relationship with my dad, it was based on how I viewed him when I was a teenager and how I view him now, which are both very, very different things. And so actually, whether at the time I thought he was a you know, stoically absent father, just because I was a moody teenager, like that's just how I viewed the world at the time. And like um I think when you're writing, the most important thing you can do is just tell the truth about how you felt at a specific time and be clear about that perspective, be clear about where that falls in the narrative, because like your default has to be the truth. So if I'm writing about my father and I'm writing about how my perceptions of him have changed, like, you know, I don't necessarily think it's anything for the reader if I'm kind of pontificating a lot on what, you know, whether I was right or wrong to see him in a certain light when I was a teenager. I have to just present how I felt and let the reader decide. You know, trust your readers. You know, there's a much trickier conversation to have about how you square that with the people you're writing about. But I think a lot of that is to do with just presenting the events as they were true to you, and not sort of dictating how you want the reader to feel about
Yeah.
them. Because if I
Yeah.
if I wrote down, you know, my father was a terribly conservative capitalist, blah 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 blah, like that's not as interesting as me just showing you that, you know. And that's the same with writing. Like, just make sure the writing's good and true, and that will often get you to where you need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, yes, I completely agree with that, and I think Grace, I feel like there's a question underneath the question, so I just want to address that, which is what if I hurt somebody? What if I hurt a family member by writing the truth about them? And I just want to say, because I think it's true, you will. It's going to hurt them no matter what. It's going to hurt them even in ways that you can't anticipate, because that's what happens when you're writing your truth. It's not their truth. They're going to have a different feeling about it. And because you're a writer and you're putting it forward in a way, they can't match that. So your version of the story is going to go out in a way that theirs can't. So I think knowing that, for me, knowing that, there's a power in knowing that, because then it's a matter of calibrating. How do I want to be a human in this moment? What do I do to be the like the version of a human that I want to be? And for me, that really came down to the question of, and I've said this before, but am I writing this for vindication, or am I writing this to understand something better? Like, what is the motivation behind putting this out in the world? I can write whatever I want, but if I'm putting it out in the world, am I writing it to kind of say something in a way that other people will look at this person and realize they're awful, and I'll get kind of a bunch of people on my side? Or am I writing it because I don't understand something and there's something that's still tangled in me that I am trying to work out and think through? And if I'm writing for vindication, I usually cut it by the time it's time to make it public. If it's writing something that I'm trying to figure my way through, it's writing to know myself, I put it out, and I know that they might get hurt and I may get hurt by that crumbling thing between us, which is the truth, right? It's a really shifting thing. But I also think that's sort of our job as writers, to hold on to that and try to put it out for other people. So, and Nikesh, you've done a wonderful job of that in this book. I'm very excited for you. I'm very excited for this book to be available to everyone. And I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mira. I obviously a huge fan of your work as well, and love everything that the Asian American Writers Workshop does. I hope to be there in person someday.
Thank you both so much. My name is Lily Philpott. I'm the programs manager at AAWW, and I'm just going to share a couple of quick closing remarks, and also a hope that absolutely, Nikesh, we can welcome you in person to our space in New York City at some point in the future. And Mira, of course, as well. You both are always welcome when we are open once again. I want to call just really quickly for a round of sort of virtual applause in the Zoom chat and the YouTube chat for both of our authors, for this incredibly just wise and fascinating, vibrant, dynamic conversation. We're so grateful to both of you for joining us, especially on a Saturday, and for making the time zones work with us. Just quickly, I hope you'll join AAWW online later in February. Next Thursday, February 11th, we have a really exciting workshop on found poetry using concepts from astrophysics and sort of formal papers from astrophysics scholars that will be really interesting. On February 25th, we have our monthly mouth-to-mouth open mic, which is held virtually. And I hope you will RSVP on our website, aaww.org, and join us online. And then just one last note that this event was recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel and our podcast, AAWW Radio, if you want to revisit the conversation or share with friends, family, colleagues, etc. And so the last thing, we're going to close the Zoom in a few minutes, but we'll leave it open for a moment. Staff will be in the Zoom chat if there are questions that we can answer. And we hope you'll hang around for a moment and just chat with us in this afternoon and sort of early evening if you're in the UK. But thank you both again, Nikesh and Mira. We're so grateful for your joining us, and everyone who is online with us as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.